And good morning. Did I hit the right button? Come on. I think I did. Okay. Too many buttons once again. Good morning. So, a today is talking about capacity and personal capacity to travel, do work, learn projects, just stuff that's piled up. And so I'm like, how am I supposed to do this? How do other people do this? I don't know the answer. So it started with discussions about which conferences I and others are going to attend. And this is quite a list, and this isn't even all of them. These are just more the like business central focus ones. And so I have something going on in Canada in February that I'm going to try to make. Um, and then in April, there's spring break with school. And so I may go camping with friends, or we may go on a family vacation, looking into that. But then we start conference season in mid April. And there's Directions NA in Florida. Essentially, 1 week later, there's Directions Asia in Bangkok, Thailand. And then, less than a month later, in May, Dynamics Con Live in Arizona. And then at the same time, there is a Dynamics Minds conference, which is a new conference in Slovenia. So you can't attend both of those. So people are having to choose, okay, am I going to fly over to Slovenia from the US? Or if you're in Europe, it's much more convenient, presumably. Am I going to go to Dynamics Minds in May or to Dynamics Con Live in May? That's a choice. And then right after that, May 29th through June 2nd, Days of Knowledge Nordic in Denmark. And then a couple weeks later, BC Tech Days in Belgium. And then I'm vaguely aware that Days of Knowledge is going to try to do several different conferences. I didn't even list those, like UK and something else, and potentially something in September for the United States. And I don't know where that's going to be at or what the dates are. And then in October, Directions EMEA in France. Or I guess it's, I would have to go early, hang out in France, but I think it's in early November, 1st or 2nd November, something like that. But those are the dates I'd have to block out. And I'm just looking at this list thinking, um, I, I can't do all of this. Obviously, I can't do Slovenia and Arizona the same week. So I'll be in Arizona. Could I do back to back Florida 1 week and then 1 week later Directions Asia and Bangkok? That's like an 18-hour, minimum 18 hours of travel just to get to Bangkok because there's mandatory one stopover coming from Los Angeles or California. Like I would be destroyed. And then right after Dynamics Con Live, can I jump on a plane to Denmark? And so I mean, I'm looking at this thinking, yeah, I I can't do this type of schedule. There are people who are. They're signing up for all of these things, as many as they can fit. I mean, more power to them, but I don't know. I came back from Directions EMEA and I thought I felt okay, but then after a few days, whatever, I don't think I got it from the concert, but from the conference, I had a cold. And so between jet lag and a cold, I was recovering for a full 2 weeks to just get back on track after EMEA in Germany. So I don't know that I can pull off Bangkok, Denmark, and France. That's just a lot of travel, not to mention the expense. So I'm having to make choices here. What do I attend, and where do I submit sessions to present? And that in itself is a bunch of work. So it's like, okay, some people are doing a lot of this stuff. That's a bit much for me. So then it's like, okay, where else does this concept of capacity apply? Looks like my slides are kind of not working right. So work learning. So I used to do programming and focus on programming. Now that on our team we have a programmer, I'm like, well, I need to focus on product management, coming up with products and features and how we're going to implement that and design and customer requirements and figuring out the whole marketplace for products. And I'm doing sales and support. So if the programmer's handling that, should I still focus on programming? Well, I think it is helpful to have a second person who understands these things. So a second person who understands automated testing, who understands Business Central functionality. And I just saw this the other day, a tweet about, I somehow stumbled across this feature in Azure SQL database called Ledger. And it's kind of not the greatest name, but Ledger, I think they kind of took that and tried to be clever with, blockchain type of thing. But it's basically a read-only log or some type of full ledger of all of the changes made to a database, all of your records. You can have snapshots and change history, and it's kind of this fixed, permanent audit log of all the activity in your Azure SQL database. You can enable this feature. It's like, well, for one particular table that we are using, that would be handy. It's kind of our ledger of record, our master database for certain activity, and I would like to preserve the integrity. So I still need to stay on top of this stuff. And it's pretty granular. I need to first hear the word, like, wait, what is that? Then I need to research it. Then I need to think about, okay, is this relevant for us? And our developer is doing development. And if he starts having to research this stuff, that takes him away from development. So you have different roles. So I'm like, okay, do I need to kind of give up learning or programming? So that's a capacity issue that I have. And if anyone, another topic, if anyone has ever done a free project, it's kind of one of those things. There's the saying in the US, no good deed goes unpunished. Because at first you do this thing, you offer it for free or you give it away or whatever that consists of. And then you get requests, well, could you focus on this? Or could you add this feature? Or, hey, there's an update needed here. And pretty soon, it doesn't take long for this thing to go from your pride and joy to, man, what did I get myself into? And it's the ongoing maintenance. And then if you move on to do something else, another role, another task, you go from developer to project manager, product manager, well, maybe you're not in the details as much anymore. So free apps. I believe Jeremy Visca's offered spare-brained licensing for free. And this allows customers, partners, ISVs, whoever is able to publish to App Source or wants to license a Business Central app to have a licensing solution in place so you don't have to build it from scratch. Great in concept, very kind offer, but he's now realizing, well, the licensing solution that he chose to integrate with his app is now changing their pricing, and it's not cheap. So he's now having to rethink, okay, do I need to retrofit this to support a new platform, which requires researching those other platforms, researching their APIs? So it's like, so if there are 50 people using SpareBrain licensing, well, they're going to get hit with fees. So maybe they're saying, well, hey, I'd like to use this platform or this licensing or payment solution. And so, he doesn't get paid for this. And then there's open source software. I once did an open source project, or I created a solution, just offered it for free, open source, put it on GitHub. And then it's like, well, this doesn't work, or there's this bug. And I moved on to other things. And I hadn't touched this thing in a few years. And someone said, well, what about this? I'm like, here's the source code. Knock yourself out. I'm just not connected to it anymore. I don't even work with that application and I don't maintain it. And so it essentially, like thousands of GitHub projects, becomes abandoned, right? Technically, it kind of works, but if there's a problem, I no longer support it. And blog posts. I try to contribute blog posts. I write blog posts, but it's just one other task. And I try to do blog posts for MVP contributions and to give back, but it's one more task that I need to think about. Video tutorials and training. So I've done them. So it's just one more thing to do. Can you maintain that? If some people did training videos, I did them on learning BC development from scratch. And I'm done with this series, but now it's 2 years old and things have changed. Do I need to do that again? If you've ever done a paid training course or an online course, well, things change. Do you go and update that again? Or does it just become old and stale and no longer valuable? And podcasts. People have done podcasts, and there's a joke. If you've done 3 podcasts episodes, that's more than 99% of people who start podcasts, right? Because you just lose momentum. It's more difficult than you thought. You're not getting the views or the listens that you thought you would, so you get discouraged. So I started to post these live streams as podcasts, but I'm behind because it's just one more step that I need to do to take the audio, do a little bit of cleanup and editing and post it. So there's friction there. So I haven't posted some lately. So do I continue that? And then anyone who's written a book in the technical book industry, well, I know you're not getting rich off of those books. And if you need to do a second edition, a third edition, what is that worth to you once you get over that initial contribution and feeling of pride that, wow, I published this book? I know Eric Hogard has a pretty good system. So I think it's every 6 months when there's a new BC release, he will update his book and try to include all sorts of new features. So it's a fair amount of work. And then he updates his source, he republishes to his online publishing platform, and that works well for him. But if you don't have that system in place, there's a lot of friction to update that. And you're making maybe a couple $100 a year off of the book, right? So there's that. And infrastructure. So I updated my network infrastructure to try and, it was very much about learning, but it was also about improving my security. So instead of just this ISP firewall router thing that I don't have to maintain or touch and never gets updated probably, I have a firewall. And so now I need to update it, maintain it, pay attention to it, and make changes and tweak some settings occasionally. So that required some learning. It's relatively low maintenance, but it's always in the back of my mind. Okay, is this causing a problem? Is this working? Am I properly trapping this traffic or that attack? And then Pi-hole. And Pi-hole is great. It's relatively low maintenance, but there's a little bit of maintenance, right? So that's just one more thing in my local network that does require maintenance. Sometimes it stops working. Sometimes it requires a reboot. It should be updated occasionally. So at least once or twice a year, it should be updated. So that's just one more task, like changing the batteries in the smoke detectors or rotating the tires on your car, whatever this routine annual maintenance is that you need to do. One more thing to add to the list. And then it's like, well, my firewall doesn't have great logging. So I set up something called Graylog to receive the logs, to ingest them, and get that syslog data and perform some analysis, send me alerts because I wasn't aware of some problems that were occurring. So that's yet another thing that I need to maintain. That consists of 2 VMs. Each of those VMs need updating and maintenance, right? Well, and then my Hyper-V server that hosts those VMs, that occasionally stops working for whatever reason and need maintenance. These things don't work perfectly. They work very well and they're relatively low cost, but occasionally something like this happens where my drive D just disappeared. And this machine, the last year or so, has done this. Like a drive will just drop. I don't know why. I'll reboot or I'll shut it down. I'll wiggle some wires and it works fine for another 6 months. So, not sure what's going on. Maybe I need to replace it. Don't know. And then to maintain and monitor all this infrastructure, I need yet another VM running something called Uptime Kuma. And so it monitors all of my systems, says, am I getting a ping from this? Am I getting an HTTP from this? Am I able to, connect to this? Is everything working okay? So here I have one more layer of infrastructure to monitor my infrastructure, which is just this pile of stuff, which has built up over time. So at what point do you kind of cry uncle and say, okay, how do you maintain all this stuff? And then I actually was trying to upgrade some stuff, and I found that I could buy these used, they're called ultra small form factor PCs, like USFF PCs, these Lenovo ThinkCentre super small little PCs. They're essentially like laptop grade boards in there, but they're like $80 each. Cheap, far cheaper than I can get a Raspberry Pi. So I've had Raspberry Pis get a little flaky, more maintenance, right? So for my Pi holes, rather than running them on Raspberry Pis, I was looking to run, say, the Raspberry Pis or Ubuntu or Linux servers on these machines. Well, I bought them. I got busy. I went to Germany. I came back and I looked at them and I was like, I don't even remember what I was going to do with these things. So I knew I had something in mind, but what? And I was like, okay, maybe this was for that, but what are the other two for? So there's that. And someone else on Twitter actually reminded me what I had in mind based on my old tweets, like what I was probably thinking. It's like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then recently, I just wrote a blog post about this. Data breaches, spam, phishing, all sorts of mess, and personal email accounts. So I started to said, okay, this is a mess. I'm going to try to clean this up. So I'm substituting this mess and working to clean that up with my personal email by adding one more layer on top with a service called Simple Login. And this allows you to create email alias. Well, benefits to this, but it's one more thing to manage. Now, there's a trade-off here, right? With all of these things, okay, there's either a risk or a hassle or some mess you're dealing with, and these products or services or solutions or hosts or Pi holes or whatever it is, they may help mitigate or minimize or clean up or help you manage those things, but those things in turn need to be managed. So I need to learn how to use this simple login service. How do I deal with email aliases? How do I send and receive email in order to maintain that OPSEC? And it's going to be interesting. And then with my firewall and Graylog, I'm now getting some rudimentary alerts, rudimentary dashboards. I'm collecting data, but Graylog is really not the best solution for monitoring and alerting and visualizing what's going on. So a lot of people in the InfoSec world use Grafana. So something like this in order to Graylog ingests their firewall and network data, and then Grafana reads that Graylog index data and presents you with these visualizations. It's kind of like a Power BI type dashboard of sorts, but it's apparently relatively well oriented for Graylog and other SIM or SIEM data in the InfoSec and network monitoring world. And so next up, let me just fix my slide because I'm clearly, let's see, animations. Yeah, so more maintenance on my animations. So hobby learning, so on the side, I'm interested in stuff. So we have something called the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and this is a career. This slide, this picture right here, entire career, you could spend the next 10 years learning this stuff, understanding this stuff, becoming an expert in what this means, how it applies to network security. So I don't think I'm going to become an expert, but if I can even be superficially aware of and superficially understand these terms, terminology, what it means, how it relates to network security, I think that would be helpful. And then I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the pen tester talked about Burp Suite and how he used Burp Suite in a pen test to just fully compromise this e-commerce website that the owner was very proud of. He thought it was very locked down, and he thought he was being very clever. And this pen tester said, when you reset a password, it resets to a 5-digit password. Well, of 5 digits, you only have 100,000 combinations. And so I believe he used Burp Suite to just do a brute force against these accounts that he had triggered a password reset. Within 15 minutes, he was in every single account he reset. And he compromised the entire website, A to Z, had access to everything. It's like, wow, that's pretty powerful. And so I was like, I'd like to at least understand what that is, how it works, what the features are, what could that be useful for. And I recently bought a book. I saw a tweet about this on pre-release, so I pre-ordered it from Amazon. And it's called Cybersecurity for Small Networks, A Guide for the Reasonably Paranoid by Seth Inoka. Like, you had me at the title, instant pre-purchase, because a lot of cybersecurity is focused on enterprise. It's this $10,000 SIM solution. It's this $20,000, attack prevention framework and alerting framework, like really high-end, expensive stuff, snort. And it's like, I don't have $20,000 as the starter kit to spend on this stuff. And so what this author does is talk about things that a small network can do, a small network administrator, IT provider who helps support small networks. It's like, count me in. And just in the introduction alone, he mentioned a few products and services that will be used in the book. And he talked about something that I'd never even heard of. It's called a network tap. And it makes sense, but I had just used the kind of the super poor man's approach of a laptop with PCAP enabled. And so if you understand what that means, if you've ever tried to use Wireshark, it's like, it can be kind of a hassle. So you can buy this device. It's a couple $100, so it's not cheap, but you just plug it in, and it's a hardware network tap that intercepts all the network traffic and feeds it to Wireshark for you. So you're not having to configure laptops or mess around with network config or PCAP. It's like, duh, of course that exists. I had no idea. So those are the things that I'm learning from 30 pages of reading the introduction from this one book. So this is all great, but it's just adding to the pile, right? And so great book if you're into this stuff. I think it's pretty cool so far. So I'm very interested in learning it, but it's more things. So how much capacity do I have for this stuff? And if you listen to my last, okay, I give up on the slides. Sorry for the animations, but if you listen to my last stream, I talked about some DIY stuff. It's like, well, if you do this stuff yourself, it's not hard, takes a little bit of learning. You watch a few YouTube videos and all of a sudden you're an expert in this one simple kind of like low maintenance task. So I was like, oh, there's this car maintenance items that a dealership would charge me $400 for, whatever they're going to charge these days. And who knows how good of a job they do. And it's just like, can I just do this myself? If it's not that hard, if it takes 10 or 15 minutes, fine, I'll do it. But something you got to do, something you got to learn, 10, 15 minutes, well, you got to set up, get prepped, and clean up. So that's an hour at least, right? And it's like, okay, could I install the LED lights myself? Yeah, I could. It's kind of interesting the first time, but then the second or third or fourth time, you're like, oh, do I really want to do this? So that's one more thing to add your capacity stack. And over time, the word accretion comes to mind, right? So Pi-hole, firewall, Unify wireless networking, Graylog, Elasticsearch, Docker in the BC world, PowerShell in the BC world, BC Container Helper, right? DevOps, Azure, Business Central, CRM, password manager, simple login, email aliases, and like the pile just keeps growing. And some of these things are just kind of background tasks. You train yourself, you get in the habit, and they just kind of disappear. So for me, password manager, totally transparent. And it's a lifesaver because I store so much information. I can just look up stuff and I no longer have that mental overhead of trying to remember anything. I can barely remember, what I did 5 minutes ago. So I have to write stuff down. And so when I go to look up, it's like, okay, how did I configure that Azure tenant? Well, it's in my password manager. I no longer have to remember it. I no longer make mistakes. And I have my instructions for how to do something. So in that regard, these things are helpful. Pi-hole, it's helpful. It reduces the risk of my network. It reduces ads. It reduces, cryptocurrency malware sites or whatever. So it's a security thing. It helps my family and minimizes noise on my network. But it's one more thing I need to maintain. So accretion is the process of growth or enlargement by a gradual buildup. One of the secondary definitions was extraneous addition. In many cases, this is. So like maybe it's a new gaming console, or maybe it's this new stereo setup that I have, and it's just stuff that builds up. Sometimes it's not really extraneous because, hey, Pi-hole is really helpful. Password managers are really helpful, but it is a cost that you take on, right? So from which conferences you're going to attend to which books you're going to read, which skill sets you're going to decide to learn, which hobbies, which family commitments, which vacations, what travel you're going to make. It's like, I only have so much capacity. And I think I'm just going to have to say, look, I can only attend 2 or 3 conferences a year. I don't care what country they're in. And maybe I need a rule. I can't attend 2 conferences in the same month. So if on May 15th there's a conference and on May 23rd there's a conference, can't do it. I need to pick one. And if there's a conference in May, late May in the US, and a conference in early June in Europe, can't do it. I need so many weeks to recover based on my past experience, right? So anyway, what are your rules for dealing with capacity? Like, when do you say no? And even better, are there any tips or tricks or games you play, mental games, in order to decrease the things you have on your plate? So how do you get rid of something like, say, Pi-hole or network monitoring or this hobby? How do you explicitly say, okay, I'm done with this. I'm selling all this stuff. I'm getting rid of it, getting out of the house, so that it doesn't just keep piling up. Like, you can't just keep adding to the stack and not getting rid of anything. So how do you get rid of stuff? I'd love to make room for more, but that means I got to get rid of something. So anyway, I'm curious. Eric Hogard says you should care what countries they are in. Yeah, I mean, one of the obvious criteria is which continent, right? So if I'm in the US, a conference in Europe represents a significant cost. There's the air travel is the number one expense. And then the time required to travel, it's like a full day to get there, a full day to get back. The recovery time is a good week to get over jet lag and all that stuff. So that's a boundary. And people in Europe have the same cost. If there's a conference in the U.S., there's only so many times they can travel to and from the U.S. Or if they're going from U.S. to Asia, that's a pretty brutal triangle: Europe, U.S., Asia, back to Europe. So that's a multi-week endeavor. And so, yeah, so that's a challenge. So I need to pick and choose, and maybe I only do one conference in Europe. And yes, Eric says the offer cost of not working all those days. However, for some people, definitely there is a cost of not working those days. In theory, I'd like to be able to work seamlessly while traveling, so that geography, my location, doesn't matter. But the downside to that, or the reality of that, is I'm not traveling to Denmark to just hang out and sit, in a grassy field in Denmark enjoying the scenery with my laptop in order to do work. I'm going to a conference, and that takes time out of my day. I won't be available as many hours as I would in the US, and the time zone has shifted. So the reality is I can't work with the same efficiency as what I would be doing if I were home. So yeah, there's downsides. But anyway, just some questions. How do you assess your capacity? How do you assess when you can't do something? How do you get rid of something that is occupying, some mental cycles or some of your time? And how do you just say no and dump it and move on? So, yeah, these are just open-ended questions. And this was triggered by the crazy list of conferences. And I know people were attending several of them. And I'm just like, you must be superhuman because I know I cannot do that. So, Eric Hogard has a synthesizer collection for sale, and he has an entire wall of classic computers. Those might come up for sale in 5 or 10 years, but yes. Okay. Thanks for joining, and watch that capacity. Don't overdo it. And open to tips and tricks on how to reduce the mental and physical clutter in one's life. Okay. Cheers.